I recently made a video on my advice before you start a hedge fund, and that did pretty well because I think I have experience doing something that most people haven't done, which is starting their own hedge fund. In this video, there's a similar premise of I have experience doing something that most people haven't done, which is raising external capital, starting my own software business, and also being in the financial industry where we sell this software and this technology to other financial firms and hedge funds and very interesting types of customers. So I think in terms of being able to talk about starting your own maybe financial data business or just startup in general, I have a lot of experience there, and I can talk about what I've learned and some of the things that have been very successful for me, so that if you're interested in doing similar things or pursuing your own business, then hopefully my story can at least lend a little bit of help to you. So first I'll start with my background and my story. So very young, very early on, I had been a little bit of a serial entrepreneur. I went to an elementary school, which in a weird way I attribute to a lot of my current work style and work ethic, which is this elementary school that I went to was very project based, very non-traditional and very project based. And when I went to high school and then of course college after that, I felt that that style of learning where it wasn't project based, it wasn't exciting or engaging to me, where it was kind of just studying and tests and homework, that type of learning style didn't connect as well to me. And I had this strong interest and fascination in continuing to learn through projects. So throughout my entire childhood, I had been learning through projects outside of school and kind of continuously doing my own small businesses. So I would do things on YouTube, I would do things on the internet, I would kind of just get fascinated by different niches, different subtopics, go all in on it, and then eventually learn something from it, which I could then go into other businesses with. So just an example of this is very early on, over time, I started making videos about a certain form of automated trading in financial markets when I was like 15 or 16 years old. I would make videos on this on YouTube. I was completely anonymous, and this allowed me to learn a lot about finance, about software engineering, about automated trading, and many kind of super niche topics. And even though I was 15 or 16 years old, I was anonymous, no one knew how old I was, and I was the only person at the time making videos on the specific subtopic that my YouTube channel did very well on. Eventually, through this YouTube channel, I started to partner with different software businesses. I got a lot of commission and different business opportunities where my business started to grow and I did very well. And essentially, what happened at this time is this was part of my serial entrepreneur addiction, which is I had some success just doing things that I was super interested in, and I continued that and just reinvested everything into more and more new businesses, just doing new ventures, talking about it on YouTube, and continuing to grow my own success in a way. So over time, I did a bunch of these small businesses. How I would describe them is they were very revenue, like high revenue businesses with very low costs to run them. And this did very well until I started to reach a wall in terms of success that I could reach. So I could kind of replicate these small businesses, which did very well, but I couldn't scale it beyond a certain point. So I had a certain business that I tried where I had raised some capital and it was very successful in being launched. And this business had a big exploit happen with it, where essentially I was a non-technical founder for this business. There was a big exploit that happened, and I felt powerless in terms of basically watching this business collapse without me being able to do anything, because as much as I could read code at the time, I was still probably under 18 years old at the time. As much as I had a light familiarity with coding, every single time I did these projects or businesses with partners, I would be the non-technical co-founder. Now, fortunately, I was young enough to where at the time this learning experience made me realize the value of software engineering and programming myself. So I took some time after this business that I did when I was below 18 years old. I took some time after that to go all in on kind of teaching myself on how to be a full stack developer. So I did some courses online. I just did a ton of personal projects. I started freelancing, and I learned how to do software engineering on my own. That was kind of the first step to something that I believe was super valuable to me, which is one, I took time to accumulate this very valuable skill that I use to this day of software engineering. And then two, I also realized through my earlier experiences the value of being able to have a scalable business, because I think there are many businesses where you can generate a lot of cash, but it's not going to be scalable beyond a certain point. And I was really kind of wanting to pursue the thing that could be scalable beyond some of those limits that I had been reaching when I was younger. So after learning how to become a software engineer, part of the way that I wanted to prove to myself that I actually had the skills that I thought was I started doing freelancing. Like I mentioned, I learned a lot through that. And I also had a great portfolio of projects of things that I had done, both from my own businesses when I was younger and freelancing and doing my own personal projects once I learned how to program. I was able to get a full-time job while I was still in college. So I was working at a robotics company while I was still in college and also working on my own business. So this, I would say, was one of the busiest periods where I had my hands in many buckets. And I think for a lot of people, one piece of advice I would give is when you are pursuing your own project or business, I think you have to have your hands in many buckets. Of course, it might not be as extreme as my situation where I was working a full-time job, also full-time in college, and then also doing my own business. But I do think, you might have to do a full-time job and then also run your business on the side. And there might be a certain type of person that has to commit a lot of effort into doing that. Essentially how my schedule looked is I would do classes early in the morning. I would go to the robotics company for the rest of the day, work full-time after the robotics company, and after doing my classes in the morning. Then after the robotics company at like 6 o'clock, I would drive to my own office and work on my own business until pretty late at night, kind of go to bed pretty late, and then wake up and repeat the same thing every single day. And then on the weekends, I would just work on my own business as a way to supplement additional time that I could put into that. So as I was doing this, I was learning a lot of things. By working at this robotics company, I started to have a better idea of how to run a scalable business, how to manage like a software engineering team, and also just see processes in a larger software business. That being said, this was still a relatively small scale software business that I was working at. But then following that, since I was working on my own business outside of this company, I started to just create content around the thing that I was working on. So I was essentially reinvesting all of my salary or paycheck from this robotics company into my own business that I would work on after hours when I wasn't working at the robotics company. And what I would also do is I would create a lot of content around what I was working on. And I think this is something that what I've seen from other founders or people pursuing their own businesses is they don't talk enough about what they're working on. And I think sometimes this is something where even like a very skilled founder or someone with a really amazing idea, their weak point might just be talking about it or covering it online. I think with my background of having done the YouTube channel when I was very young and being used to creating content around what I was doing, I felt very comfortable in front of a camera, in front of just talking or explaining about some random subject. And I think many people have a fear or strong discomfort around doing that. Whenever you look at many of the most successful people, I think part of what makes them successful is not just their ability to create some amazing product that everyone buys, but it's the ability to communicate that they have that amazing product as well. I think nowadays on Twitter, you can see some new young kid who creates some software project, goes viral on Twitter, and he has like a multi-million-dollar business overnight. I think a lot of people who don't do that are missing out on a massive opportunity of the ability to gain exposure and kind of litmus test all of your ideas through these different social platforms, where if you make 100 videos about some idea that you're working on and none of them take off, none of them get views, you have no following, there's a good chance that that business model is not going to work. Um, or on the flip side, you make one video, you upload it on Twitter, and it gets 5 million views and you have 10,000 customers in one day. I think that's another very good indication that you have a great business model. So I think something that a lot of people are way too afraid of is putting themselves out there and talking about what they're doing. And at least for me, this was one of the most consequential things that I did is while I was working at the robotics company and a full-time student and working on my own business, I made videos and content on my own business. And through this, I was able to meet people who would allow me to go full-time on my own business by giving me funding. So the reason that I was able to get funding, and before I had any users of my software or any users of my business, the reason that I was able to even start pursuing my own business in the first place was because I had just been talking about it, and someone found me who said, "Hey, I really like what you're doing. I want to help you do this more. So what can I do? What resources can I provide? How can I help you achieve that?" And so that was like a huge turning point for me in terms of being able to pursue my own business full time and then work on turning it into a scalable business like I had wanted earlier on. So now that I had the ability to go more full time on my own business, the next step, the next area where I think I have some good advice on is pivoting and finding product market fit. I think after you pass this step of like receiving external funding or being able to go full time on your own business, maybe you just had enough savings to go full time on your business anyways, you'll still be at this step where most likely you haven't hit product market fit or still a very scalable business model. And I think this is another very difficult time when working on your own business because you need to continuously pivot and change what you're working on and be very self-reflective of what's not working and what is working within your business. So similar for me, there was a very long period where there were things that worked to an extent, but didn't work in the way that I needed it to have like a very scalable, viable business. So the scariest part about this stage is there's a lot of fear around limited resources in terms of investing your time in things that will maximize your chances of success, because during different portions of your business, you might have a few paths to go down, and it might be scary, like, well, if I choose the wrong path, I might not have enough resources to pursue this other path, which might have given me a better chance at succeeding. So you have to balance kind of choosing the right path of what pivots you want to do and which ones will maximize your chance of success. But then also, I think a big part of what will allow you to achieve that sooner is if you listen to your customers, and then also constantly question everything that you're doing and be willing to completely change kind of the entire model of your business constantly until something works. I think some people, or sometimes it can be easy to get comfortable about some aspect of the business or not question different parts of the business. And like those are the things that will cause you to ultimately fail. I remember even like managing my own development team and having software engineers that I work with, something that I constantly thought of, which was like a quote from Elon Musk, but really it's just a quote that I think is valuable in general, is this idea that the worst thing you can do is have an engineer work on something that doesn't need to exist. And I constantly thought about this because it was also something that I learned at the robotics company. Just an anecdotal story that I had is at the robotics company, we're making these amazing autonomous robots. And many aspects of this robot was very complex and you know, it's an engineering feat. It's very impressive infrastructure. One thing that I noticed at the robotics company is there was this hardware part of the robot, which this one engineer was spending all of their time trying to fix and improve. And this hardware piece of the robot that this engineer was spending all of their time on, and this was a very talented engineer, is a part of the robot that was very insignificant, like super insignificant, to the point where you can actually buy this part from a third-party vendor for a pretty cheap price. But since this robotics company decided to make it themselves, it was taking this one engineer who was very talented all of his time to work on this part which could have been bought from someone else. So I constantly thought about this in my own business, which is I think one of the scariest things you can do is work on that part that doesn't even need to exist, but invest all of your time and effort into it, rather than changing it significantly or building something new to where that part would be completely obsolete, right? So I think like an example of this would be at the robotics company. Let's just say this part was a light on the robot. And maybe this engineer was spending years and years of their time making this light better, but in reality, you could have just purchased or completely changed the design of the robot to where you could put an iPad instead, and that iPad would have been 100 times better than that light, and all of the work that you put into the light would have been useless up until that point. So I think with my business, this was the same thing there. And looking back, I think there were many elements like this where whenever you're coming up with things to work on, it's very easy to work on things that don't need to exist or that are overly complex or that should be re-engineered entirely. And you have to constantly question everything that you're doing to not fall into those traps. And sometimes you will fall into those traps. You'll invest a lot of time and effort into something that you realize later didn't need to happen. But at least being aware of it is super important until you reach that section of product market fit where once you do have those things that really stick and that provide you a lot of value, and you know that your business is going to grow through those things, then you can focus on product feedback, on talking to your customers, and polishing and investing like years and years of your time, just making that thing that you created better and better, right? Like you want to find the part of the business that is worth investing years and years of your time on. And then when you get to the scale of someone like Apple, you could be hiring people for hundreds of thousands of dollars just to polish a little button on the website. But that actually makes sense because that button on the website might be generating you millions of dollars of revenue per year. So I think that that's kind of the scale that you want to aim for. So I think, yes, just an overview of some of the lessons that I tried to go through in this video. One, create content around what you're doing, both before you have funding and customers and when you have funding and customers, because the only way people are going to hear about what you're doing is if you talk about it. So definitely talk about it all the time to everyone. Make content, make blog posts, make YouTube videos, make TikTok videos, make literally any form of content and share it with people. Ultimately, the people you want it to reach, it will reach. Then understand product market fit. Be able to continue to pivot and iterate on your product, cut out things that don't need to exist, be able to identify things that don't need to exist, and don't be afraid of constantly changing your strategy until something works. Because if something's not working, then the only thing that's going to fix it is not working on that same thing more, but changing things until everything starts working. And once things are working, you'll know that it's working. Finally, the one last thing I wanted to mention is negative criticism on the way. So I think whenever anyone is entering into any new industry, assuming you have a product that's kind of different than what other people are doing, you're going to have a lot of people, both from customers and from people that you think might be able to help you, give you advice, who will tell you that what you're working on is not going to be plausible, or that a bunch of other people tried this and they failed. But the thing is, ultimately, you know your product and your business more than this other person. And I think whenever you get this advice from people, or whenever you hear these things from people like, hey, the thing that you're working on is not going to work, or it's not unique, or it's not different, or your business is not, it's going to fail like these 10 other ones that tried to do a similar thing. It's definitely possible that your business could be in that category, but you should know your business enough to where you can either justify and explain to yourself why they're wrong, or you have to be able to also take that criticism and implement it into what you're doing and take it very, very seriously, because chances are that that person who told you that criticism about your product and who was honest about it, the hundreds or thousands of other people who are trying to use your product thought the exact same thing but just didn't tell you that thing. So at least for us, for example, in my business, it has constantly been a thing of like usability and ease of use. And And probably for people who don't have like a strong nature of UI or user experience, this is something you'll face where people will say like, hey, this is really hard to use, or it's too confusing, or it's glitchy, or it feels like an unfinished product. These are things that you can hear, but you have to take that feedback really seriously, and constantly question yourself as well, to get it to the point where you're no longer receiving that feedback, or at least iterating on it and taking that feedback really seriously, because ultimately the customer in those cases do know best in terms of if they're actually able to accomplish the goals that they want with your business successfully. Anyways, that was my rant on some general tips and tricks and some of my story in starting my own business. I hope it was at least somewhat helpful, and I will definitely be making more videos like this on topics that I think I have some form of unique insight on, and I hope it provides value to you. Thank you all so much for watching.